Eric Rudolph, America's forgotten right-wing terrorist. Why talk about Eric Rudolph? Well, timing. The Winter Olympics are occurring. Rudolph kicked off his bombing campaign against what he called elitist socialist Marxists, abortionists, and globalists during the 1996 Atlanta Olympics. It's a compelling story. It's one of the largest prolonged domestic terrorist attacks of the modern era. And while events were covered during the time, it's largely been forgotten as a cultural touching point. It's not something that's used for comparison in the modern era. And that's a theme with right-wing terrorist movements and attacks, really prior to the Trump era. Rudolph has told us what he thinks, and he's done so ad nauseum. While Jim Atkinson from a previous episode left a manifesto, it was fairly short and to the point. He was radicalized by right-wing media to hate anyone different than himself and believed liberals were socialists and communists, terrorist sympathizers, so he shot them. Rudolph, on the other hand, has self-published hundreds of pages of what can only be described as horrible content, and I wouldn't suggest anyone seek it out, as it's mostly hosted on a site run by a DOJ Homeland Security labeled domestic terrorist organization. However, since it exists on that platform and elsewhere, we have a much deeper understanding of Rudolph's political, social, and religious views, which are frightfully not too far off from mainstream conservative narrative in 2022. We'll go over all of this along with describing his bombings using eyewitness testimony and reports from the era. Significance. It's important to acknowledge right-wing extremist action and belief in an era of mainstream acceptance for right-wing radicalism. Eric Rudolph provides unique insight into both from the perpetrator's perspective. Big picture, what are some ideas that he targeted? Socialism, one world government, Marxism, feminism, people and things that he targeted. Non-Christians, LGBTQ community members, abortion clinics. And we'll see that this is all tied together, from the sexual liberation of the 60s leading to women's control over their bodies and how that affected traditional family units, to integration in schools manifesting in critical race theory style grievances, to LGBTQ acceptance being seen as eroding the family structure as tied to Marxism's attempts to destroy Western civilization. The key thoughts include casting so-called egalitarians and people just seeking equality for others as Marxist totalitarians, gun rights, anti-feminism, anti-globalism, one world government conspiracies, lumping all of this into generalizations that we could just say are anti-socialist. We see this type of rhetoric everywhere today, from Republican lawmakers and campaign ads to social media personalities ranging from Jordan Peterson to Tim Pool. The insight that Rudolph provides really brings out into the open these connections from mainstream right-wing figures to extremism. And this is important to understand moving forward as Republican lawmakers and talking heads continue to try and diminish manifestations of this mainstreamed right-wing extremism, such as the January 6th Capitol insurrection, ties between right-wing militias and gangs like the Oath Keepers, Three Percenters, Proud Boys, just name a few, and political operatives. Plots to kidnap Democratic officials being dismissed and forgotten. And the modern Republican Party, really beginning with the Tea Party movement, paving the way for MAGA Trumpism, adopting more and more violent imagery and rhetoric. Rudolph was pilled before being pilled was a thing. He's the reality you get when you continue down the right-wing extremist ideology so popular today amongst media and internet personalities and Republican representatives. An overview of topics that will be discussed. First, Eric Rudolph's crimes. From Eric Rudolph's perspective and eyewitness perspectives. Second, Eric Rudolph's beliefs. Communism, feminism and abortion, Christian identity, the patriot movement. There's many things included in this, as Rudolph is more than happy to share his beliefs with whomever will listen. Ties to modern politics, the Tea Party movement, MAGA. In words, if not deed and movements, and by that I mean looking at rhetoric from campaign ads, modern Republican politicians, as well as movements surrounding them, such as those mentioned before, the Oath Keepers, for instance. And then we'll form conclusions, reiterating Rudolph's ideas and Rudolph's actions and what they mean today. Continuing with a general introduction, Eric Rudolph is a right-wing terrorist currently serving consecutive life sentences for multiple bombings. Eric Rudolph grew up with far-right Christian influences. He targeted the Olympics as a symbol of socialism and one-world government. Rudolph targeted the Other Side nightclub for grievances against the LGBTQ community, feminism, and what he called egalitarians, Marxists. He targeted abortion clinics for religious and ethical reasons, connected to an underlying critique of Marxism tied to the free love movement and feminism. So what exactly were his crimes? His first attack was on Centennial Park, and this was the center, the hub, again, for the 1996 Atlanta Olympics. He killed 2 people and injured 111 people. Following that, Eric Rudolph attacked the Northside Family Planning Clinic. This was in Sandy Springs, Georgia, a suburb outside of Atlanta. There were 6 injuries, 2 of which were critical. Following the Sandy Springs attack, Eric Rudolph planted bombs outside the Other Side nightclub. 5 injuries occurred, 1 being critical. And lastly, Eric Rudolph set bombs at the New Woman all-women's clinic in Birmingham, Alabama. This resulted in 1 death and 1 severe injury.